Book 2, Chapter 4 of the late Mr. Jonathan Wild the Great. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Dennis Sayers. The late Mr. Jonathan Wild the Great by Henry Fielding. Book 2, Chapter 4, in which Wild, after many fruitless endeavours to discover his friend, moralizes on his misfortune in a speech, which may be of use, if rightly understood, to some other considerable speech-makers. Not the highest fed footman of the highest bred woman of quality knocks with more impetuosity than Wild did at the Count's door, which was immediately opened by a well-dressed liveryman, who answered that his master was not at home. Wild, not satisfied with this, searched the house, but to no purpose. He then ransacked all the gaming houses in town, but found no Count. Indeed, that gentleman had taken leave of his house the same instant Mr. Wild had turned his back, and, equipping himself with boots and a post-horse, without taking with him either servant, clothes, or any necessaries for the journey of a great man, made such mighty expedition that he was now upwards of 20 miles on his way to Dover. Wild, finding his search ineffectual, resolved to give it over for that night. He then retired to his seat of contemplation, a night cellar, where, without a single farthing in his pocket, he called for a sneaker of punch, and, placing himself on a bench by himself, he softly vented with the following soliloquy: "How vain is human greatness! What avail superior abilities and a noble defiance of those narrow rules and bounds which confine the vulgar, when his best concerted schemes are liable to be defeated? How unhappy is the state of priggism! How impossible for human prudence to foresee and guard against every circumvention! It is even as a game of chess, where, while the rook or knight or bishop is busied forecasting some great enterprise, a worthless pawn exposes and disconcerts his scheme. Better had it been for me to have observed the simple laws of friendship and morality than thus to ruin my friend for the benefit of others. I might have commanded his purse to any degree of moderation. I have now disabled him from the power of serving me. Well, but that was not my design. If I cannot arraign my own conduct, why should I, like a woman or a child, sit down and lament the disappointment of chance? But can I acquit myself of all neglect? Did I not misbehave in putting it into the power of others to outwit me? But that is impossible to be avoided. In this a prig is more unhappy than any other. A cautious man may, in a crowd, preserve his own pockets by keeping his hands in them, but while the prig employs his hands in another's pocket, how shall he be able to defend his own? Indeed, in this light, what can be imagined more miserable than a prig? How dangerous are his acquisitions, how unsafe, how unquiet his possessions! Why then should any man wish to be a prig? Or where is his greatness? I answer, in his mind, 'tis the inward glory, the secret consciousness of doing great and wonderful actions, which can alone support the truly great man, whether he is a conqueror, a tyrant, a statesman, or a prig. These must bear him up against the private curse and public imprecation, and while he is hated and detested by all mankind, must make him inwardly satisfied with himself. For what but some such inward satisfaction as this could inspire men possessed of power, wealth, of every human blessing which pride, avarice, or luxury could desire, to forsake their homes, abandon ease and repose, and at the expense of riches and pleasures, at the price of labor and hardship, and at the hazard of all that fortune hath liberally given them, could send them at the head of a multitude of prigs, called an army to molest their neighbours, to introduce rape, rapine, bloodshed, and every kind of misery among their own species, what but some glorious appetite of mind could inflame princes endowed with the greatest honours, and enriched with the most plentiful revenues, to desire maliciously to rob those subjects of their liberties who are content to sweat for the luxury, and to bow down their knees to the pride of those very princes? What but this can inspire them to destroy one half of their subjects in order to reduce the rest to an absolute dependence on their own wills and on those of their brutal successors? What other motive could seduce a subject possessed of great property in his community to betray the interest of his fellow subjects, of his brethren, and his posterity to the wanton disposition of such princes? Lastly, what less inducement could persuade the prig to forsake the methods of acquiring a safe, an honest, and a plentiful livelihood, and at the hazard of even life itself, and what is mistaken called dishonour, to break openly and bravely through the laws of his country, for uncertain, unsteady, and unsafe gain? Let me then hold myself contented with this reflection, that I have been wise, though unsuccessful, and am a cheat, though an unhappy man. His soliloquy and his punch concluded together, for he had at every pause comforted himself with a sip, and now it came first into his head that it would be more difficult to pay for it than it was to swallow it, when, to his great pleasure, he beheld at another corner of the room one of the gentlemen whom he had employed in the attack of Heartfree, and who, he doubted not, would readily lend him a guinea or two; but he had the mortification, on applying to him, to hear that the gaming table had stripped him of all the booty which his own generosity had left in his possession. He was, therefore, obliged to pursue his usual method on such occasions; so, cocking his hat fiercely, he marched out of the room without making any excuse, or any one daring to make the least demand. End of Book 2, Chapter 4. Read by Dennis Sayers in Modesto, California, for LibriVox.